All right, welcome everybody to our week 6 live session. So we've said it about a million times. I'm trying to be really thorough with my messaging, the texts, and the information I'm sending out. So just to reiterate, class ends on Sunday. So our week 6 assignment is going to be due before midnight, along with our quiz. If you do have any questions about that, reach out to me and let me know. There's no late period here in week 6 because right after class ends, we're rolling into a summer break. Your new classes are going to resume July 10th. We did see a little bit of a preview of what you can expect out of those new classes during our study hall session. So if you didn't have a chance to attend live, that recording is already posted, so you can take a look at that later on today. We saw a really great demo of Chef Julie doing some piping work with the spritz cookies, so you can kind of anticipate what that dough should look like and the texture of the dough. And then she showed us a bunch of different ways that we can garnish our spritz as well. But we are going to go through the mixing method. We'll review creaming during our live session right now today. All right, so in week 6, we also have a quiz. This is a great time for you just to double check your grades, make sure you know exactly where you stand. So if you head over to course quick links, there's going to be checking your course grade and instructions. Of course, anything for weeks 1 through 4. Lab assignments is already closed, but you could still improve upon discussion forums or quizzes until class ends on Sunday. The week 5 assignment is still open until midnight tonight, which is a hard deadline. So if you didn't submit that yet, or if you want to update a narrative or add any information, update a baker's percentage calculator, anything like that, that can be done up through midnight tonight. All right, so for this week, we do have a short week, but we have a short production as well. So the requirement is to make the spritz cookies and then choose between making the coconut macaroons or diamond cookies. Both of these cookies come together so quick and easy. So let's kind of walk through what that production is going to look like together. The spritz cookies is going to be just a review kind of from week 3, where we're going to be doing a little bit more of that creaming method. So we want to make sure we have room temperature ingredients here. Anything coming out of the refrigerator, butter, eggs, sugar, I always say sugar, butter, eggs, milk if there's milk. Anything coming out of the fridge should be within a 65 to 70 degree range. We're going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. And we're only going to cream the butter and sugar for about 3 minutes in this instance. We don't want to over cream because we are going to be piping these with a star tip. So excessive creaming is going to cause your cookies to spread more. So we are looking for these to really retain the shape of using that star tip, especially if we're doing like that rosette shape or that S sort of shape that Chef demonstrated. So we want to make sure we're not over creaming these cookies. Like Chef Julie said, if the batter's a little bit stiff once you have it in the bag, use your hands, use the heat from your hands, massage the bag a little bit. That will warm the dough up very slightly and make it a little bit more pipeable or easy to handle. All right, so next we're going to go in with the eggs, yolks, and vanilla extract. And I would do that. It's not a ton of egg, but I would still break that up probably into 2 additions so that we get that emulsion, adding the eggs in with the fat. If you do want to add any food coloring, you would add it in right here at this stage. And I would recommend gel food coloring. I personally like something a little bit more of like a pastel color. So if you want to do any coloring, that I would recommend, a little bit less. Less is more. Then the flour is going to go in all at once, mixing just until combined, and it'll be a pretty stiff dough. We want to pipe this with an 826 or an 827 open star tip. And then you're going to pipe it into your desired shapes. I recommend just sticking to 1 or 2 shapes so you get a lot of practice with those same movements. I really like rosettes. I think that's a classic shape for the spritz cookie. So if I'm making these, I'm probably just going to pipe the whole sheet rosettes. Just so I can kind of get the hang of that movement and get a little bit faster at it as well. The bake time is really going to vary depending on the size and shape of your cookies. But we're looking to see just a touch of golden brown on your spritz. Not a lot of color, but they should be cooked all the way through. This isn't necessarily a cookie that we want to see very moist. So we got mise en place, creaming, cookie dough. And then this is kind of what Chef Julie was demonstrating, some different piping techniques. And these are the cookies baked. You can see they really hold their shape very well. You can really distinctly see the lines of using that star tip. And then these ones are dipped in like a colored candy melt and then garnished with sprinkles. So we do have a lot of variety as far as what we can do to garnish these cookies. So you can kind of play around with that as you please. For me personally, this is like one of those weeks I like to point out how obnoxiously particular I am as a pastry chef. So I do like a half dip on a spritz cookie like this. I think it looks really nice. But for me, when I do that half dip, I always dip this side of the cookie where the seam is. So that way you can see that really beautiful swoop sort of shell shape, and I can kind of hide that seam where I finished piping. So that's not a requirement. You can dip them or garnish them however you want. It's just a little insight into some of how crazy I am. I like to turn all my cookies in the same direction and dip the same side for every single one. So they look super uniform. And then I have that best presentation to put forward as well. With the spritz, I do need to see an internal crumb photo. I want to make sure that they are cooked all the way through. So that's one of the photo requirements. But outside of that, it's a pretty quick and easy production, especially since that one is a review. Does anybody have any questions about the spritz or any of the garnishes or anything Chef demonstrated during our study hall? Hiding the ugly bits. Well, sometimes I leave them plain. I don't always dip them. I don't really recommend refrigerating them. This is a cookie that I think is going to store a little bit better at room temperature because otherwise it's going to absorb some moisture. So I know there was some talk during study hall about what types of chocolate we can use to garnish these. If you're using the candy melts and you want to speed up the process, you could pop them in the refrigerator for like 5 minutes. And they won't take on too much moisture and the chocolate will set up really nicely. But you can skip the fridge and that will still set up at room temp. If you're in a really hot or humid environment, it just might take a little bit longer. You might be looking at like 15 minutes for the chocolate to set up. How long do they last? I would say at room temp in a closed covered container, I would say maybe about 3 to 5 days. If you're not going to garnish your cookies, you could chill or freeze them. Freezing them, they could last 6 months, even longer. This is a cookie that you could even pipe and freeze raw and then just pull them out and bake them as needed. That could be an option as well. If I was going to make a whole batch of these and leave them plain and freeze them baked, when I want to pull them out and use them or serve them, I probably would just toast them in a low oven for a couple minutes just to help dry out any of that excess moisture. You can use the colored sugar for the diamond cookies. Yep, we'll talk about that in just a minute. I have a couple examples I can show you for those too. Any other spritz questions? Brown sugar to garnish, Brittany? Well, we could talk about sanding sugar. With the garnish on the spritz cookies or the diamond cookies, I do recommend using something like a sanding sugar. So you could use the sugary sprinkles, the different colors. I like more of a coarse sugar if you can find it for the diamond cookies. I personally like the plain kind of clear crystals and the coarse sugar for the diamond cookies because I feel like that gives you the most diamond sort of glittery kind of effect on the outside. But you could really use any type of sanding sugar to garnish either our spritz cookies or our diamond cookies. But we are definitely not using press for the spritz cookies. Those do need to be piped. You wouldn't want to substitute brown sugar for white sugar, like 1-for-1 in the spritz cookies because the brown sugar is going to have more moisture and a different flavor. So you do want to stick with white sugar. Black sanding sugar? I don't think I've ever seen that. Where do you even get that? That sounds really cool. Do you think it would bleed a lot? If you don't think it would bleed a lot, I think you could still use it for the diamond cookies if you wanted to. But you could definitely use regular granulated sugar on the diamond cookies as well. When I am piping rosettes, and I'm piping a spritz cookie like this, I typically have my piping bag and my tip at like a 90-degree angle, like perpendicular to my pan. I don't really pipe these ones at an angle. When I pipe ladyfingers, I pipe at an angle. When I pipe pot of choux, I pipe that at an angle as well. But if I'm piping something like rosettes, I'm going to keep my bag straight up and down. And you want to make sure you're holding your tip off of the surface of the sheet tray too. Because if your tip is too close, you're going to pipe really, really flat rosettes. And we do want these to be a little bit tall. They are going to spread a little bit because of that height, but we don't want to pipe them super flat. That's cool. I've never seen the black. I'm gonna have to look for the black. All right, so let's jump into coconut macaroons. So love it or hate it, we survived meringue week. I thought for the most part, what I saw was really good examples of meringue, really good. I saw maybe a few that were a little bit under whipped, which is an easy fix. You just need to whip them longer. But for the most part, I saw some really beautiful productions this week. So if you liked making the meringue, if you thought it was easy, if you want to review, the coconut macaroons are a great option. I love these cookies so much. They are naturally gluten-free. There's no flour, so there's no substitutions to make. They are without leaveners too. So they're accessible to a lot of different types of people. It's a really unique cookie with a really unique flavor. And there's some different things you can do to garnish these as well. So I'm a big fan of coconut macaroons. I think they're super easy to make if you're comfortable with the meringue aspect. These are going to bake at about 350 degrees. We're going to bake on parchment paper or Silpat, silicone mats if you want. We're going to whip the egg whites until you're starting to approach that foamy, soft peak sort of stage. And then we're going to rein in the salt and sugar, whipping until a firm peak. It's pretty much the same process we did to make our crisp meringue cookies last week, but this time instead of folding in the powdered sugar, we're going to fold in sweetened flaked coconut. And you want to make sure it is sweetened because this formula is written for this extra sugar to be added in. So make sure you're finding a sweetened coconut product. But you want to fold that in. Be careful not to over deflate the coconut macaroons. We still want them to be really meringue and light and fluffy. This is a drop cookie, so it's going to be portioned with a scoop. They shouldn't spread much. They should hold their shape pretty well, but you still want to make sure you're spacing them out a little bit, just for even baking and airflow and things like that. They're going to bake for about 15 to 18 minutes, totally variable based on the size of your scoop or portion, but they should have a little bit of golden brown. So these are pretty simple. They come together really quickly. It should still be pretty bright white in here with the coconut folded in. You should still see a lot of that meringue and moisture present. One of those other extra crazy things I like to do is once I have my scoop portioned, I'll usually have gloves on like my non-dominant hand, and I'll tuck all these little tails where you can see all the coconut kind of getting away from the macaroon. I'll tuck all those back into the scoop before I portion it. So that way they have really clean bottoms. Otherwise, sometimes these little pieces can get really, really super hard and crunchy. So it just gives you a little bit more of a uniform cookie. But you can see here, it's just a light golden brown, not a ton of color. But look how crunchy that is. That's why I always tuck those away. And these cookies can be garnished or left like this. They can be garnished with a little bit of powdered sugar. They can be striped with chocolate, which I would either temper chocolate or use the candy melts for this. I like to dip the bottoms in chocolate and then stripe the tops, but I don't like to cover the entire cookie in chocolate because I still want you to see the color and the texture. I want you to see that it's coconut, so that way you really know what that cookie is right when you look at it. Once you break them open, which we do need an internal crumb photo, they should be bright white in the center just to show that meringue is cooked all the way through. I'm gonna peep the chat. I'm gonna say that you can add chocolate chips to the coconut macaroons with an asterisk, okay? This formula calls for 300 grams of sweetened flaked coconut. If we just start throwing chocolate chips in there, we're going to knock down some of the texture of our meringue. So my recommendation, if you want to add chocolate chips, use mini chocolate chips because they're not going to be quite as heavy, and substitute some of the coconut for chocolate chips. So this one calls for 300 grams. I probably would sub 30 or 40 grams max for the mini chips. So I might do 260 grams of sweetened flaked coconut with 40 grams of mini chocolate chips if I wanted to make a chocolate chip coconut macaroon. But make sure your baker's percentage calculator reflects that if you want to do it. You can definitely dip the bottoms. I like to dip the bottoms too. I think it looks really clean and you still have a lot of that chocolate on there. Yeah, they're so good. And it's something where you could even chop up like toasted salted almonds and fold some of those in instead of the mini chips, or maybe, you know, sub a little bit of the coconut for the almonds with the mini chips. And what else can you do to these? You could actually toast your coconut as well, which would give you a totally different flavor and texture because you're going to have that toasty sort of flavor throughout the entire cookie instead of just on the outside. So there's a few things you could do to kind of switch this cookie up a little bit if you wanted to, but as is, just plain and simple coconut macaroon is a really delicious and versatile cookie. All right, any macaroon questions? No? Okay, sounds good. Diamond cookies are our last option for the week. So spritz are required, and then you can make either the diamond cookies or the coconut macaroons. You just need to do one of the two. But the diamond cookies here, we're going to use the one stage method, which is my least favorite method because we don't have quite as much control over how this is going to be coming together. But we are going to control what we can here. So your butter should still be at that 65 to 70 degree range as if we were making, you know, doing something with the creaming method. Other than that, we are going to put all the ingredients into the mixing bowl and turn it on. We want to still stop and start the bowl, only mixing as needed, scrape down pretty frequently. But once you start to see that cohesive dough forming, that's when you're going to remove it from the mixer. It is possible to overmix these, so just be careful with the one stage method. It can be easy to overmix, so just stay near your mixer, scrape down as necessary. You're going to form this dough into cylinders, and this is an icebox cookie. The dough could be stored in those cylinders. So you just take the cylinders out of the fridge or freezer, cut them into your slices, and bake. And that makes it really easy to store this raw cookie dough so that you could have fresh cookies whenever you want. I used to do a garnish on a creme brulee that was an icebox cookie, like these diamond cookies. So that way, with very minimal production, I could have fresh cookies in my creme brulee every single day. And if I was running low during production, all I had to do was cut another cylinder, throw them in the oven, and I could have fresh cookies within like 10 minutes. So it's really easy to keep up with in that aspect. But you're going to chill these cylinders in the fridge for about 30 to 60 minutes. That's going to help the butter kind of solidify and harden a little bit. We're going to bake these at 325, but first we want to make sure we brush the sides with cold water and roll them in sugar before portioning. And that's what's going to give us that really beautiful kind of glittery diamond effect on the edge of the cookies. We want to portion these about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. I definitely recommend using a kitchen ruler if you don't have one. I would pick one up. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can get them for like $1. But it's just going to help ensure that you're cutting the cookies the same size and shape. And we do have a video on how to get those cylinders shaped too. But we want them to be like pretty even so that way our cookies are all going to be the same size and shape. Using that cutting board or sheet pan method where you're really pressing the dough in the center, you're going to push any little air pockets out of the middle of the dough as well. But look how even that is, right? Maybe the edges aren't going to make the most beautiful cookies, but everything here in the center should be really uniform. This one's just rolled in granulated sugar. A coarse sugar would just be a larger piece of sugar. Think like turbinado. Maybe you've seen the brown sugar that's the larger chunks or crystals. Portioned cookies, they're not going to spread much. You might get a little bit of spread, but not much. Just a little bit of golden brown on the edge. And this is going to be kind of a crispy cookie. Again, we're cooking it all the way through. It should be really buttery, very tender. I think of these as being almost like a butter cookie, a little bit like those ones you get in the tins, the blue tins, you know, I'm talking about the sewing kit cookies. They're kind of like that, especially with that sugar on the outside. This formula does call for orange zest. You can use orange zest if you want. You can omit the zest completely. You could use lemon or lime or grapefruit zest. So you have a little bit of flexibility with the flavor there. Oh, yep, I just saw that question. See? I don't think there's a mix time on this because we're not doing creaming. So you're just going to mix until combined, but you want to keep it on the mixer for the least amount of time you can. You don't want to overmix. Yeah, shortbread. Yep, exactly. It is an interesting recipe. It's really good. I like the flavor and the texture of these cookies. But yeah, you can use any citrus zest, any sprinkles you want on the outside. Well, you want to use the sugar sprinkles. I should say any color. Does anybody have questions about the diamond cookies? Okay, that's good. We're going to just kind of run through a little bit of review and then we'll be pretty much done here, which is awesome. Almost on to summer break. You can use sanding sugar on the outside of these cookies. I wouldn't color these cookies. I would leave the diamond cookies plain. You're just going to use coloring on the spritz, but you can use colored sanding sugar for these. I wouldn't color the coconut macaroons either. I have seen people try to do that, but they brown a little bit in the oven and then the outside color kind of changes. So I wouldn't use food coloring in the coconut macaroons or the diamond cookies. Yes, that's a good way to handle the dough is to not fully mix it on the mixer, but finish it on the desk. Yes, it is totally optional to color the spritz cookies. You can, or just leave them plain too. And the spritz cookies really don't have to be garnished in any way. We saw those demos of different things you could do during study hall, but you can leave them totally plain as well. All right, so just a little bit of review, some things that you read about just a few weeks ago. We're seeing a couple of these different mixing methods and makeup methods this week, so I thought it was a good time to kind of go over this information again. So one stage method, we're putting everything in the bowl, mixing everything together at one time, and that's what we're doing this week with our diamond cookies. Creaming method, integral to pastry. You're going to see this in almost every single class you take. Maybe with the exception of the breads class. That's probably the only time you won't use it. But this is creaming fat and sugar and then adding in eggs and liquid and then going in with flour and leavener. So that's kind of your standard practice. When you see creaming method, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. Sanding method you'll do in your next class, I think a couple times to make pie dough, to make biscuits. But in this one, we're going to start with dry ingredients and cold butter. And you're going to incorporate the cold butter to a sandy sort of texture with those dry ingredients. So you'll get some practice with the sanding method. And then the sponge method we did in this class to make the lady fingers, as well as really the crisp meringue cookies and the coconut macaroons. So those are mixing methods, and that's combining the ingredients to make our batter or dough. Then we have makeup methods, and this is how we get our cookies shaped. So a dropped cookie is one that we're shaping by scooping. Very easy way to get your cookie shaped. A bagged cookie, something like a spritz that we're going to be piping to shape. A rolled cookie is one that's going to be rolled out with a rolling pin and then cut. So we did sugar cookies in this class. You'll be doing Linzer cookies and alfajores and a few other rolled examples throughout the program. And then an icebox cookie is something like what we were doing with the diamond cookies, where you're storing that cylinder chilled. There's other shapes you can make for icebox cookies as well. If you've ever seen those kind of more intricate checkerboard cookies, that's another style of icebox cookie too. All right, a molded cookie is going to be pressed with the design, but a really classic, easy example of this is your classic peanut butter cookie, where you're kind of pressing that zigzag shape into the top with your fork. A bar cookie is something that's shaped, into a bar or a cylinder and then baked, like our biscotti. A sheet cookie is something like a brownie or a blondie, where you're filling the entire pan with product before baking. I got brownies on my mind. And then finally, a stencil, you'll be making a tuile cookie in just a couple classes, but this is going to be a really, really soft dough, almost like a paste that you're going to spread into a stencil and bake. And with something like a tuile, you can pull them out of the oven, mold them when they're warm, and make them into different shapes as well. So something else that you might notice going through the formulas for the week is we are using a couple of different types of flour. So we talk a little bit about gluten development. You should have read probably a lot about gluten development, I think in week 3 or 4. But gluten development is essentially what happens when the proteins within the flour combine with the liquid in the recipe. So that liquid could be coming from egg, milk, oil, could come from a lot of different places. But once we start to mix flour, the protein is going to turn into gluten, mixing with liquid. So whenever we say, oh, we want to be careful about gluten development, that always means we want to make sure we're not over mixing once the flour is incorporated into the formula. So different flours are going to have different protein contents. Something like a cake flour is going to have your lowest protein content. And that means it's going to be mixed the least amount as well. So it can produce something really tender and soft like a cake. And then you'll see something with a slightly stronger protein, maybe with pastry flour, which we don't use a ton of pastry flour in the industry. I've seen it here and there, but not really that often. This one's going to have about an 8 to 9% protein content. AP flour is all purpose for a reason. It's 10 to 12% protein, but it's so versatile. You can use AP flour to make cakes. You can use AP flour to make breads. Is it always ideal? No, but does it work? It almost always can work. So that's why we do use a lot of AP flour. Finally, your bread flours are going to have the highest protein content. And that's because we're looking for gluten development. We want to knead bread for 10, 12, 15 minutes, sometimes even more, to create that structure that we need for something like a bread, which has a totally different crumb than what you might find in a cake. So those are the main differences you can find between the flours. You can actually make your own pastry flour and you can make your own cake flour pretty easily by sifting AP flour with a little bit of cornstarch. So by making a substitution and taking some of that flour out and subbing it with starch, you've now essentially removed some of that protein content. And some of the reason that we see the variation in percentages is it's going to vary between brands, especially. But if you're doing something like this where you're making your own cake flour or making your own pastry flour, then you're going to see even a little bit more variation in those percentages. So if you want to try to make your own cake or pastry flour for this week, I think the diamond cookies call for pastry flour. Off the top of my head, I can't think of it right now. I don't think any of them call for a cake. Oh yeah, the diamond cookies call for cake. Okay. So you could make your own cake flour if you wanted to. If you want to purchase it, you totally can. They sell cake flour at the grocery store, in the baking section with the flour. The cake flour is usually on top. You might see that red box Swans, I think is the brand for the cake flour. And then there's a blue brand as well, but I can't think of what it is off the top of my head. So you're probably looking at the top of the shelf or the bottom of the shelf in the flour section if you are looking to buy cake flour. It is a little bit more expensive, so that's why we sometimes like to make it if possible. Sebda, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay, so I have two questions. I don't know if I got the wrong flour because we do like Bob Mills. We try to do healthy in our house, like organic. And so the only thing that they had was it says fine flour, but it says pastry and cakes. But when I Googled it, that's the brand that came up when I Googled cake flour. Is that wrong?
That sounds like it would be right to me. Does it by chance say the
It's
protein
pink.
content?
Let me go look. But
I think that one's probably okay. It's the pink one, fine pastry.
yeah.
No, that one should be fine. It might have like a little bit stronger of a gluten content than cake flour. I think it'll work out just fine for these though.
Okay, and then another thing, I was YouTubing all the diamond recipe cookies, and
Mhm.
PA came up, and she did such a cute little demo where she painted her cookies pink and she put sprinkles on them. So I wanted to do that. I'm like so hype about that, but you said I can't use food coloring. Is it okay to copy her? It's an
What,
Escoffier video. It's
which,
what year it is. It's so cute though. She did pink with sprinkles. It's a Escoffier Home Gourmet. It's 7 years ago. How to make diamond cookies.
what that video is? I'm so curious.
It's so cute. And she did chocolate, and then she did vanilla, and then a marble.
I found it. Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's Chef Susie. Oh, this video is so old. I think if you're gonna use a tiny bit of food coloring like she did, like those cookies are pretty pale pink. I think that would be okay. Yeah, just don't go too crazy with the food coloring, but that pink is pretty pastel.
She added it after the mix, so she folded it in.
I don't think I would do that. I think
Would
I
you
would do it right on the mixer.
with the vanilla?
Yep,
Okay. All right, thank you. That's it.
of course. Yeah, I think that Bob's Red Mill flour is going to be just fine. We try to stick to organic flours too. I really like King Arthur. I just love King Arthur everything. And I don't think they have a cake flour now that I think about it. Oh, Sheldon said King Arthur. Maybe she uses King Arthur. I love King Arthur. They have it at most grocery stores. I know they have it at the grocery store around me. I actually got a big bag of King Arthur, like 15 or 20 pounds or something at BJ's. I don't know if everybody needs that much flour, but we go through a lot of flour in my house. Right. Do we have any other questions? No. Yeah, King Arthur is like my favorite everything. I love their flour so much, but I also really love their website. So when it comes to like pulling recipes offline, especially if I want to try a new technique or a recipe I haven't done before, there's like a few websites that I trust. And I think every formula I've ever made off the King Arthur website has been really reliable. So if you haven't checked out their website before, I definitely recommend looking at it. They have reviews on a lot of their recipes as well, and a lot of variations and things like that. And a long time ago, somebody asked about converting formulas from volume into, metric and grams and things like that. And they do also have an ingredient weight chart on their website that I have used a ton as a reference. I actually tried to print it a while ago and it wasn't printable. I don't know if it is now, but it's a very, very useful tool. If you have some of those family recipes that you want to standardize and turn into weights so you can make sure you're making the same thing all the time, definitely check that out. And I did just put the link directly to the ingredient weight chart in the chat. But I just Google King Arthur baking ingredient weight chart or something like that, and it comes up every time. Well, thank you so much for an awesome class. My kids are freaking out right now, so it's probably a good time to shut it down. I hope you can't hear that, but I'm sorry if you can. I am gonna try to kind of stay on top of grading for this weekend. So anything that comes in before 3 p.m. tomorrow will be graded tomorrow or Saturday. But I'm probably gonna try and stay on top of Saturday's grading too. I'll probably get online late Saturday night and get some assignments graded. So if you want to get your assignment graded early, kind of know where you stand before break starts, try to aim to get your assignment in a little bit early. That is a very sweet question in the chat. My due date is July 19th. And being this is the third baby, we have just about everything we need. Thankfully, very little shopping for this one. And I've been gifted a lot of pink onesies to make up for all the cars and trucks she will inevitably be wearing as well. So thank you so much for that question. But thanks so much for such a great class. I've had a wonderful time with you guys the last 6 weeks. You can feel free to message me, email me, text me, keep up with me throughout the program. I'm always around if you have questions. You can connect with me on social media too. I'm pretty lame on Instagram and I don't post as much as I probably should. But Instagram is like my main social media. So if you want to follow me, I will of course follow you back. I am Pastry Malone, one word, as my Instagram handle. And I dropped that in the chat as well. So thanks so much for a great class and a great term. Reach out to me with any questions. Bye guys.